Hey guys, we're going to start our new unit on complex numbers. So at the top of the page, you're going to see that these are the three terms that we've already talked about in terms of types of numbers. So we're going to introduce today imaginary numbers and complex numbers. So an imaginary number is a number that when you cannot take the square root of a negative number. I don't know if you remember in class, if you ever tried that, if you've taken the square root, your calculator gave you an error. That's because it's imaginary. However, from here on out, we're going to be dealing with imaginary numbers. You won't be able to use your calculator to get an answer, but anytime that happens, you're going to use the letter I. Pretty easy, I for imaginary. Now, complex numbers are going to be, they're complex because they involve any type of number up here with an imaginary number. So your complex numbers are going to have a number involved that will either be added or subtracted to an imaginary number. So if I have these three examples here listed next, and you're going to categorize them into real, complex, or imaginary. So the first one, 24, pretty easy. We consider that a real number. We use it every day. 6i, because of the I involved, that is what is categorized as an imaginary number. And the last one, if you see, you have a number that's being added to an imaginary number. That is now what's considered complex. Now, what we're going to do today, the main skill that I want you guys to grab from this lesson is being able to simplify your imaginary numbers. So just like before in the last unit, we were simplifying radicals. The only difference here is that there's going to be a negative underneath that radical. So you're still going to have to recall your perfect squares. However, instead of leaving it as a square root of -1, anytime this happens, you're just going to use the letter I. So an example, the square root of -16. If you wanted to think about it as what we did last unit, where we split this up, well, I can split this up into 16 times -1. Well, I know that the square root of 16 is 4, and we just, like we said before, the square root of -1 will now always be simplified to I. So your final answer is 4i. Same thing with the square root of -9. You can split that up into 9 times -1. So your final answer would be 3i. The next example, a little bit different because it's not a perfect square, but I have a 2 in the front as well. So I have 2 times, and then I'm going to split up 24. So I'm going to think, okay, what two numbers multiply to 24, meaning one of them needs to be a negative number. So I have -4 times 6. Now if I simplify that again, I have 2 times, and again, this is considered a negative, the square root under the negative. So it simplifies to 2i times radical 6. So when I multiply those two together in the front, your final answer will be 4i radical 6. All right, so why don't you pause the video right now and try the next one by yourself, and then press play and see if you got the right answer. So to simplify this, I would get 4 times, if I split 75 up, -75, I get -25 and 3. So again, becomes 4. This here, because it's negative, simplifies to 5i radical 3. So your final answer would be 20i radical 3. All right, so if you see below, I have 12 examples. Again, I would suggest maybe you pause the video, go through so you can do them on your own, and then play the video, and I'm going to run through the answers. You can kind of check to see, okay? All right, so for number 1, your answer would be 3i. Number 2, 2i. Again, if you think about it as the square root of 4, that gets me 2. And because it's negative, you add that I because it's imaginary. So 3 would be 4i, 5i. All right, getting a little bit more complicated. The square root of -141. I know I have to have an I involved in it, okay, because it's negative. If you take the square root of 121, you're going to get 11. So when you multiply those two in the front, your final answer is -22i. okay? So this one would be 1/2. Now I'm going to multiply that by 20i, because that's what the square root of 400 is 20. 1/2 times 20, so your final answer would be 10i. Again, hopefully you've set up the apps so that you have your graphing calculator. Really, you don't need those type of calculators. If you want to just use the calculator on your phone, that's fine. So I get 2/7 times the square root of 196 is 14, and because it's negative, it is I. And when you multiply these two, 2/7 times 14, so my final answer is going to be 4i. Okay? Same thing, so this becomes 3 times 13i. Final answer, 39i. All right, number 9 looks way more trickier than it is. So I'm going to use the skills that we've talked about before. Because it's a radical underneath it with a fraction, I'm going to split it up into 2 radicals. So I know the square root of -1 is I over the square root of 4, which is just 2. So my final answer would be I divided by 2. All right, so the square root of -40. So 40 I know is not a perfect square, so I have to split this up. So I'm going to split this up into -4 and 10. The square root of -4, so that becomes 2i. And then radical 10 you leave, so that's your final answer. Okay? So again, the square root of -24. So I know I have to split that up into -4 and 6. So your final answer would be 2i for this part, and then radical 6. And the very, very last one, I have negative in the front, so that's going to stay. Then I'm going to split this up. I'm going to split 200 up into the square root of -100 times 2. So I know this gets me negative times this part here simplifies to 10i radical 2. Negative in the front, so really your final answer is going to be -10i radical 2. All right, if you have any questions, I will be posting the classwork that goes along with this. Go ahead if you feel like you need questions, email me, Google Hangouts, whatever you need. I'll talk to you later, guys. Bye.